So today, we are going to respond to Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn's tweet in which she said that China has a 5,000-year history of stealing and cheating.
Ironically, this actually comes from a nation which has a Secretary of State that proudly acknowledged that we lied, we cheated, and we stole.
So the whole point of making this video today is to ask the senator and her fellow US politicians to put some respect on Chinese culture, and also we ask them to educate themselves before they come to their conclusions and make unsubstantiated statements. So all we are asking for is just mutual respect and understanding. And building bridges between the East and the West is what Keybros is all about. So in today's video, we will first start off by looking at how America actually imposed harsh labor and certain legislation to steal and cheat Chinese Americans. And then we'll move on to talk about relevant ideas in Chinese civilization and Chinese culture to prove that we do not have a history of stealing or cheating. And finally, we will move on and talk about how racist and anti-Chinese rhetoric has been employed by different American politicians, and how this racist rhetoric echoes the sort of racist ideas that have been around in America since the 19th century.
Now, if you all recall, there's actually one thing called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and it remained the only law to have been implemented that sort of prevented all members of a specific ethnic or national group from immigrating to the United States. Don't forget that this was not repealed until 1946. Now, a series of massacres actually followed. For example, the Rock Springs Massacre of 1885. Chinese ones were shot, robbed, burnt alive, and no arrests were made on the perpetrators. And another incident was the Hell's Canyon Massacre of 1887. So an amount of gold worth around $4,000 to $5,000 US, that's a lot of money back then, all right, have been stolen from the miners. But again, the officials did not bother investigating the matter.
Let's not forget about the background to the Chinese Exclusion Act. So Chinese workers were actually involved and were integral to the construction of the Transcontinental Railway, which connected California to the Atlantic seaboard. So we earned a lot less than our fair share, because hiring Chinese as opposed to whites kept labor costs down by a third. Alongside the poor working conditions, for example, at certain times, even entire camps were buried under avalanches. In fact, 20,000 pounds of bones from Chinese workers who perished during the construction of the railway were shipped back to Chinese for internment. But what was the American response? First of all, they blamed us for stealing American jobs. Does that remind you of someone? There was actually this party organization called the Working Man's Party, which was led by a Californian named Dennis Kearney, and he said that we were preventing Americans from gaining work. Speaking of cheating, the saying Chinaman's chance also originated from the 19th century, which aptly described the unfairness that Chinese Americans experience in the American justice system and in the hard labor activities, which were very dangerous and often fatal. So after all of that, the Chinese Exclusion Act came along, and we couldn't even receive citizenship by naturalization. Apart from that, we couldn't even keep our jobs or our families safe. So was this not stealing and cheating?
This idea that we're intellectually inferior and incapable of being civilized does come from a writing by Arthur Smith. He does not understand because he does not expect to understand. So as you can see, this rhetoric is very embedded into American society and culture in the late 19th centuries. Another thing is that the idea that we are savagely controlled by our instincts and thus incapable of being civilized can also be seen in this writing by John Rhodes. So he said that he, under certain conditions of agitation, is overtaken by all sorts of subconscious and uncontrolled reflexes of dorsal column automism. So these quotes justified exploiting us for hard labor.
The senator provides no example, and it is devoid of facts and logic. And plainly, the statement is simply a childish insinuation that should not be dignified with a proper response. But I will tell you what China has given to the world: printing blocks, gunpowder, paper money. On the flip side, is it even necessary to mention how the West has stolen and exploited China since the Opium War in 1840? I think it is totally fine for people to disagree with the CCP or previous Chinese dynasty, but we must make a distinction between criticizing the culture and criticizing the government. Fear-mongering and callously using rhetoric that suggests the Chinese people, who it should be made clear are not one and the same as the Chinese government, to serve this outbreak as some kind of payback for barbarian customs is, at its core, blatant prejudice. So the same thing actually applies to most objections the West and certain radicals in Hong Kong have against China. It's simply racist and bigoted to say the Chinese are evil, brainwashed, and barbaric, or that they steal, cheat simply because you despise the communist government.
So now let's dig deep into some traditional Chinese culture. So the hierarchy of Si Nong Gong Seng, which is basically scholars and then farmers and then artisans and then business people, is basically because rightly or wrongly, businessmen were thought to have been stealing and cheating to accumulate their wealth. Culturally, the Chinese value hard work. Another Chinese culture which we're really proud of is the Confucius ideology. Now, there's certain quotes I really like from this. For example, 君子五美, which translates to 5 virtues of the noble individual. 威而不廢, 怒而不怨, 欲而不貪, 泰而不驕, 威而不猛. So what this means is that we have desires, but not to be greedy, and we should work hard, put our utmost into the work, and do not become spiteful, all right, in a nutshell. Also, in 論語, Confucius also said, 君子喻於義, 小人喻於利. So this basically means the noble individuals direct their actions through the principle of righteousness, and petty or moral individuals can only comprehend selfish interests and personal gain. So turning away from individuals to rulers, Sun Tzu basically said, 義立而王, 信立而霸. So this means that kings are established through righteousness and kingdoms prosper through trustworthiness. So does this sound like a culture of stealing and cheating? I don't think so. So as you can see, cheating and stealing is deeply immoral in Chinese morality.
So having been to the mainland several times ourselves, we can tell you from first-hand experience the mainland folk are the most genuine, hospitable, and welcoming people that we have ever met. So I honestly find it infuriating that a person who so obviously lacks even the most rudimentary of understandings in relation to Chinese culture has had the platform and the opportunity to openly degrade the Chinese people in such a despicable manner. So I think the senator should educate herself. And we actually have a Chinese saying that applies to this scenario, which is 人必自謀，然後人謀之. So the senator should learn from her mistake and refrain from making such statements in the future.
Next, we also want to point out that this is not the first time that racist and blatantly anti-Chinese rhetoric has been employed by American politicians. So Senator John Cornyn from Texas has claimed that the Chinese have brought the coronavirus upon themselves for having a culture where people eat bats and snakes and dogs and things like that. And he went on to defend his comments as not being racist because he wasn't talking about Asians, we're only talking about China. Well, I don't think he quite understands that actually Chinese people are actually Asians. I mean, they are from Asia, all right? So by definition, you're basically also talking about Asians. So what does this remind us of? We've talked before about the Chinese Exclusion Act back in the mid-19th century, is they are uncivilized, unclean, filthy beyond all conception. That's actually from the New York Daily Tribune from 1854. So this shows that the rhetoric employed across American politicians has not changed since the mid-19th centuries. Isn't it time to wake up and smell the coffee?
So not only is blaming Chinese people and Chinese culture a massive problem, but I also think that people tend to generalize from multiple viral videos. For example, in The Mirror, which is a UK newspaper, they actually said that a Chinese woman was filmed to have been eating bats in China. But according to France 24's investigation, the dish that the woman in the video was eating actually looks like the bat meat soup traditionally served in Palau, which is a micronation in the Pacific. So again, let's not rely on biased reporting and generalizing those biased reports to represent the entire Chinese population. According to foreignpolicy.com, the number of Chinese people who like tucking into dishes that Americans would consider unusual is confined to very high-end or weirdly macho audiences. So again, generalizing the actions or habits of a small or possibly even non-existent minority to 1.4 billion people is irrational and devoid of facts and logic.
So there's actually a quote from Vice that I'd like to share with you, and you can determine yourselves whether it's actually racist or not. So this notion of Anglo-centric cultural superiority exactly relates to and explains why Senator Blackburn made her comments.
It's actually incredibly ironic and funny that Texas, where Senator Corman is from, people there actually have a habit of eating something that is called the Southern fried rattlesnake. So it's incredibly funny that Texans themselves actually like to eat snakes. So maybe, according to the senator's logic, they deserve COVID as well. So I personally find spam incredibly revolting, to be honest. And I simply don't understand why Americans can enjoy eating spam. But the thing is, we don't degrade Americans for eating spam or eating rattlesnakes. It's their culture and we will respect that. All that we are asking for is having respect in return. And this doesn't just apply to cultural or eating habits, but also our differences in values or in methods of governance. And finally, let's dispel the rumor that food safety is not up to scratch in China. In fact, China's food safety score, according to the Global Food Security Index, is 95. In fact, the food safety score in China is 32 points above the global average, and our overall quality and safety score is 72.6, only 2 to 3 points behind Japan and New Zealand. It actually relates to kind of rhetoric that has been going on in Hong Kong that everything made in China or all food from China is toxic or causes COVID or causes other types of health concerns. So maybe we should dig into the facts and use facts and logic instead of relying on prejudices.
This marks the end of our video reacting to Senator Blackburn's comments. Again, thank you very much for tuning in to watch our video. If you like this video, please give it a like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel by pressing the red button below. In the future, if you like these sorts of videos, we'll also do similar episodes by reacting to current trends, comments made by politicians that are devoid of facts and logic. So please stay tuned to Keybros and see you guys in the next episode. Bye.